Visa's new fraud rules can kill your business. My name is Maria Spragas. I am a payment processing expert with over 20 years of experience. I would like to talk to you today about Visa's new VAMP program, which is the Visa Acquirer Monitoring Program. And this is essentially a new program that Visa has launched to combat chargebacks, disputes, and fraud. And today I really want to dig in some tools and some different things that you should be doing in your online store to ensure that you don't put your business at risk from being shut down. Now, I did do an episode a little while back on what these fraud and VAMP rules are. I'll link it down below if you want to know a little bit more about what VAMP is. Now, the program is a little bit different in the US versus the rest of the world. But all these things I'm going to talk to you about today are just general good practices, and obviously to ensure that your business doesn't get caught, in the crossfires of Visa testing out these new programs and making sure that obviously you don't have any bottlenecks in your business and your payment processing. Now, what the main goal is by Visa launching this new VAMP program is to make sure that acquirers and payment processors really clamp down on fraud and make sure that they get rid of the bad actors and the merchants who are causing problems and really, having some fraudulent things on their stores. So they're really putting a lot of pressure on payment processors, and they're doing it by imposing fines at the payment processor level. If, for example, a payment processor has a portfolio that has too much risk, they could put fines on them. So what happens is that now payment processors are now passing the buck to the merchants because they don't want to have to deal with fines and Visa breathing down their neck about, fraud and so forth. So you will see that it'll be a little bit tougher in the next, 3 to 6 months, probably up to 12, to really get a merchant account if you have high dispute rate or if you have a lot of fraud. So it's really important that you listen to this advice that I'm going to give you and really try to implement as much as possible in your store so you can lower the risk of fraud and lower chargebacks as much as possible. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind, the shift is happening a little bit more from the Visa and payment processors end. And what they want to do is they want to shift the liability of fraud to businesses. What that means is they want you as a business owner to be responsible for your store to ensure that you let in as little fraud as possible. Now, in the past, a lot of these tools and so forth were available, but they weren't really discussed or talked about. Sometimes, processors like Stripe, they would just enforce it to all their merchants and they would activate it and so forth. Now, what Visa is saying to business owners is that they need to protect their online store. So for example, like if you have a physical business, right? You get a really good lock, you get a really good door, you get an alarm and so forth. Online businesses up until now, a lot of them aren't really paying too much attention to risk and fraud. They're expecting, their payment processor and gateways to do this for them. And oftentimes, these tools are not actually enabled, and it's just letting in a lot of fraud and it's letting in a lot of obvious bad transactions. And Visa just wants to put a stop to it. So if you are a business owner, it is now your responsibility, because of these new VAMP rules that are being launched in the next little while, to make sure that you have a lock and key on your store, that you have an alarm, you have the checks and balances to prevent as much fraud as possible. So now, if you've been operating your store for a while, you'll know that, it is inevitable that you're going to get some chargebacks. It is inevitable that you're going to have customer disputes. This happens in every online store. Now, what Visa is really focusing on is fraudulent orders. So if a customer claims, during a dispute process that this is fraud, I never made that transaction, I never agreed to buying whatever you're selling and so forth, that is going to count towards what they call your fraud to sales ratio. So that is number of transactions that come in as fraud reason codes for the dispute and, number of transactions that you have. Now, you may be thinking, aren't all chargebacks fraud? No, they are not. There could be a lot of other reasons somebody charges back. Like, for example, damaged or defective merchandise, or you may just have a general disagreement with the customer and, they file a dispute because you're not seeing eye to eye. So there are several other reason codes. And obviously there are some fraudulent reason codes, like fraud in a card absent environment is a big one that, a lot of online business owners see. So what Visa wants to do is they want to prevent those as much as possible from happening. Now, if you're in Europe or in a lot of parts of the world, this trend has actually started before, because Visa has enabled something called 3D Secure, which is 3DS, which is pretty much like a 2FA that we're all used to. For example, whether you're using Gmail, Outlook, or whatever, when you log into your email, you get a code on your phone, you have to input that. Now, in a lot of countries outside of the US, this is the norm when you're buying something online. You go, you buy something, they text you a code, you put the code in, and then you're good to go and you can buy your transaction. In the US, it doesn't work like that yet. You are just basically in your online store, put your credit card information, and you're good to go. Now, with the 3DS, it does prevent a lot of fraud because, somebody actually has an extra step to do. And if you make that extra step and you have the 3DS enabled on your cart, it's very difficult for somebody to say, this was fraud, because they authenticated it with a code on their mobile phones. So, you could, as step one, you could look into having 3DS on your store if it's possible. Even if, you're in the US, it may be something that you want to consider for certain types of transactions. Now, 3DS is not, very common in the United States. So, a lot of customers could get confused. You might lose some transactions. So you may not want to do it throughout your whole store. But for example, if you have transactions outside of the US, you may want to do it for foreign transactions, because first of all, it's mandatory in these foreign countries to have 3DS. So you may be actually losing more sales outside of the US if you are not doing 3DS. You may want to do it for a certain transaction amount. Like, for example, anything over $1,000, I would like to do 3DS security verification to validate those transactions. So take a look at your business model and see where you can fit in this 3DS, which is basically a 2FA. You can also include it in your cart. You can tell people, hey, by the way, your transaction's over $1,000. So we will ask you to authenticate it via a code sent to your text message. That way, the customers will know and will have their phone close by. So there are ways to ensure that, 3DS doesn't kill your conversions. Obviously, for non-US customers, they're used to it and they're looking out for it. But even for your US customers, if you want to make it mandatory for certain types of transactions, you may want to just give them that warning that they're going to get a text from their bank with a code. They just have to input it and, continue with their purchase. Now, as I said, it's not for everybody. It's not for every online store, because, there could be some more confusion. There could be some more delays in approving orders, but this is an option you want to think of, and that will definitely get rid of a lot of fraud, because customers cannot actually go back and say, they've been frauded after they've confirmed it with a 2FA code on their phone. So there's one method, and a pretty foolproof method. Now, in order to kind of preface everything else I'm going to talk to you about, one big rule in the VAMP program is Visa wants to prevent card testing. So there are a lot of fraudsters out there going through various means, getting credit card lists and trying to test these cards to see if they're valid and they're able to make transactions go through. So if you have a low ticket, your store may be vulnerable to these types of attacks, because usually these fraudsters, they try to go to a store where, the ticket sizes are not very big to try to test it out to see if these cards work. So Visa is now saying card testing and preventing that type of fraud is the merchant's responsibility. Now, I know you're probably thinking, well, my merchant account provider, or if I'm working with Stripe or Shopify payments or whatever the case, they should, input these rules to make sure that this doesn't happen. The problem with that is that, merchant account providers, like, for example, like us at Direct PayNet, myself and my team, we don't know everything about your business model. So we cannot implement specific fraud rules. For example, if you have a store where you have one transaction on the front end and 3 upsells, you may want to allow 4 transactions per day, or maybe it's not possible. Maybe you need to have 1 transaction per day. Like, your business model can dictate a lot of these fraud rules and these fraud checks. So it is important to inform yourself what tools are available, and obviously to implement them as closely as possible to your business model and what's allowable in your business model. Now, if you do get a card testing, operation that uses your store, unfortunately for you, Visa is now going to penalize you, and likely your payment processor will shut you down. And they're going to say it's essentially your fault because you were irresponsible in not implementing the tools that are available for you to fight fraud. I know that really sucks. And I know, it puts a lot of pressure on business owners, but this is where we're headed. Everybody has to fend for themselves in terms of fraud, and you have to make sure that you have the checks and balances. Now, a couple of things that you can do are very obvious, and most payment gateways, whether you're working with Authorize.net, NMI, whether you're working with Stripe or Shopify Payments, all these things are available in these platforms. They might be called something a little bit different than what I'm going to say, but you can find them and you can do a quick Google search, write your payment provider and write fraud rules or fraud settings, and you'll likely find that. So I'll walk you through a few of the common ones that you should definitely activate that will prevent card testing, will get you out of trouble. And obviously I'll give you a couple of things that you can do to reduce your fraudulent disputes as well. Number one is maximum number of transactions per credit card number. So you have to think of your whole funnel, and you have to think of what is the maximum transactions per day you would accept from one card number, not per customer, really per card number. And, that could be 3, 5, 6, but you want to limit it to the number of transactions that it would be possible for somebody to do on your store. You also want to limit it by IP address. How many transactions per IP address, per card number. What you might want to do is you may also want to allow, a customer to try up to 3 different cards. So, most people have 2, 3 cards in their wallets. After that, it's a sign of fraud if somebody's trying 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cards. A lot of times fraudsters use the same email address and change card numbers. So, if you limit by email address, like for example, maximum 3 card numbers per email address, that can avoid some obvious fraud. Another thing that's overlooked that is very powerful is blocking certain countries. So if you are selling to the US only, it's very easy to go into your payment gateway and block all countries outside of the US. Now you can do that by shipping address, you can do that by card number. So any card number that is not issued in the US, you can block it, or you can say anybody who has a shipping address outside of the US, I don't want it. Because if you're not shipping outside of the US, why would you accept an order from another country if you can't even send it, right? So that's an obvious one, and you can block it, and that'll avoid, some obvious issues. And you can also take it a step further if you'd like, depending on what you're selling and your audience and so forth. You may want to say, if you're only selling in the US, you will not allow outside IPs with US card numbers, because there is a sign of fraud. Obviously, if it's a non-US IP, but they have a US card and a US shipping address and so forth. Now, it may not be applicable for everybody because, people travel, of course, but, you may want to think of that during specific periods of time, or if, for example, you're having a lot of disputes, you're having a lot of issues with chargebacks and refunds and so forth, you may want to put that rule in place for a little bit of time. Now, another thing that is often overlooked, but it's super simple and very easy to set up, it's called AVS, Address Verification Service. So again, in some countries, this is not a reliable method for preventing fraud because the addresses are very difficult to validate. But, in the US, for example, you can do a zip code match. So if somebody inputs a zip code, you can match it against the zip code that the credit card company has on file for them. And if it doesn't match, you can, reverse it. So most people will know their 5-digit zip code. You can do a simple 5-digit zip code match. You don't have to match the whole address, but just doing that simple check will really prevent some fraud there. Another thing you want to do is a CVV check, which is, the 3 last digits behind the card. You want to ask customers to input that number. You want to verify that that number matches the number that's on the card. So it's important to turn these settings on in your payment gateway. I can tell you many times people come to me and customers come to us at DirectPayNet and they say, they have a lot of fraud, they have a lot of chargebacks, they don't know what happened. We take a look at a couple of their settings and they haven't even turned on basic stuff like CVV checks and AVS and so forth. So these are just, some basic things that a lot of people ignore. But number one, it'll help prevent fraud. Number two, I'll guarantee you it will increase your conversions. The more information you send to your customer's bank about your customer and information that they've input into your store, the more likely that your customer's bank is to approve the transaction. So it is really a win-win to do these validations and these checks. Now, you could take it a step further, and there are countless companies that offer additional fraud rules and fraud checks. You can do device fingerprinting. I mean, there's companies like, for example, Count, KOUNT, that offer, specific rules and configurations that you can have for your online store. The only thing I would caution you, if you are working with these types of companies, do not use the solution out of the box. Make sure you understand what settings are available, what settings are turned on, and make sure you adapt them to your online store. Fraud settings are not a one size fits all. I can tell you, I've seen nightmares where, people have lost thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars because they input the wrong fraud setting, and then customers were not able to buy because it was restrictive and so forth. So make sure you understand what fraud settings are available. Use your gateway's fraud settings first, and then if you obviously have some more issues or you're worried about some other potential threats, you can use external companies to really add the device fingerprinting on there, or add additional checks in terms of countries and IPs and so forth. So all these things are available. I'd be happy to walk you through. If you guys have specific questions on specific fraud checks or a gateway specifically that you'd like me to take a look, drop me a line down below and I'll definitely do it in another episode. Now, in terms of these validations, as I said, these are very important basic things that you should be doing in your online store today and implementing today to prevent obvious fraud, card testing, and so forth. Now, in terms of disputes, what you want to do is you want to prevent as many disputes as possible, especially the ones that are coming in for fraud reason codes. So in addition to all these tools that I've mentioned to you before, another thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you make it easy for your customers to cancel or to contact you. Now, I know this sounds obvious. If you're running an online store, you want to have customer support, but you also want to have customer support the hours that most of your customers are available. So, a 9 to 5 customer support line is usually not going to cut it anymore. I mean, if you're working through different time zones, they may not be convenient for customers in different parts of the country. You may also, want to have weekend support and so forth. So you want to increase the number of hours of support. You may want to think about now, with the advances in AI, having a chatbot there, answering frequent questions, making sure to flag things to you if, something's urgent and so forth. So you want to have those tools. You also, if you have some kind of subscription or, recurring type installment plan, you want to give your customers an option to cancel online. If you watch my channel, you'll know that the FTC has a new rule called click to cancel that's going to be enforced soon. And they're going to force merchants and business owners online to give customers an option to cancel the same way that they bought. So if you're selling products and services online, collecting payments online, you need to give your customers an option to cancel online. So, get ahead of the game and make sure that's available. That will obviously stop, more fraud reason codes, more disputes and so forth. Over time, this will save you a lot of money because chargebacks and fraud cost you a lot of money in your business. So it is important to try to make it as easy as possible for your customers to cancel, to make sure that your customers can get support. If you do have email support, you have to try to respond as quickly as possible. I would say within 24 hours would be kind of the maximum at this point to prevent that. So you want to put these things in place in your store to prevent the fraud. You want to make sure that you have your fraud rules as well to prevent any types of card testing or any type of fraudulent attacks. And obviously, if it's friendly fraud, meaning a customer comes into your store, buys, and then forgets, obviously you can't prevent those, but you could take a few extra steps, for example, to verify the descriptor that your customers see on their credit cards. So, at the end of the month, when your customer is looking at their card statement, they need to be able to recognize what they bought from you. So, I see this all the time. Businesses don't really pay attention to this. They just put a random jargon about what their product or service is. Sometimes the phone number that's associated to the business is not input correctly. There's a digit missing. So I really recommend that you go through your funnel, you buy your product or service, and then you take a look at your credit card statement and see what your customers would see if they bought your product or service. If it doesn't make sense to you, or if it could lead to confusion, or if the phone number is incorrect or is not complete, make sure you fix that, because a lot of times, customers, they don't do it maliciously. They just look at their card statement. They don't realize what it is. They call their bank. They say, I've been frauded. I never bought this, and so forth. But then when you explain, oh, yes, I did buy it, right? I didn't recognize the charge. So make sure that your customers know who you are, can recognize the charge, so there is no confusion. And obviously, if a customer has filed a chargeback, it's already too late. You may not lose the sale, in the sense of you may not lose the money, because you could win it back if you can prove that they actually bought it. But you will still get dinged as a chargeback. You will still have to pay a chargeback fee. So you want to avoid that confusion. You want to let customers, as much as possible, know what they're buying from you and recognize it on their credit card statement. Now, last but not least, I'm going to preach something that a lot of business owners don't do and don't regularly follow, is their data. Now, obviously, as a business owner, you know how many sales you're making, your profitability, and so forth. But I'm hard pressed how many times I've seen, business owners who don't know what their fraud levels are, who don't know how many chargebacks they get. They don't know their refund rate. So it is very simple. Most payment processors make this available to you in a dashboard. You can take some raw data, download it, and just sort it. But it is important for you to know where you stand. So if you're watching this episode and you're like, I don't even know how many chargebacks I have. I don't know what my dispute ratio is. I don't know how many refunds I get. This is really a basic step that you need to do for yourself, for your online business, to really be able to grow and see how things change once you start implementing some of these things. If you start implementing these things, but you don't know where you stand, you will never know any improvements that you've made. And I can guarantee you, if you implement these small changes that I've mentioned, and, really pay attention to lowering your fraud, your disputes, and so forth, it will end up being a lot of money in your pocket. So these things will take you a couple hours to set up and to really investigate, but it will pay off in spades over time, because your store is going to be more secure. You're going to get less chargebacks, less disputes. So you will also save on customer service costs, right? So there's a lot of interrelated fees that come with getting disputes, with having fraud, with having, customers complain, and so forth. So the more you put into your online store to support your customers, to really make sure they know who you are, to have clear pricing, the more likely it is that it's going to save you money over time, because you will be spending less on customer resources, customer service people, and so forth. You'll spend a lot less on chargeback fees, and you will have a lot less issues with your payment processor. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind also, a lot of online business owners have something called Chargeback Alerts. If you'd like to set them up, feel free to let me know. We can set up chargeback alerts for you as well. But chargeback alerts will not save you outside of the US. If you have an online store, or your business is located outside of the US, and you're relying on chargeback alerts like rapid dispute resolution, RDR, or Ethoca, and so forth, those will not save you anymore. What's going to happen is that if the RDR or the Ethoca alert comes in for a fraud dispute code, you will still be dinged as a fraudulent order. In the US, that is not applicable just yet. The rules can change and they evolve. So for now, if you have RDR and Ethoca and Verify and these types of chargeback alerts in your store in the US, then obviously this will help tremendously. But overall, what you want to do is you want to prevent the chargeback from even happening, because even these alerts, they start adding up and they cost a lot of money. So you want to take these steps regardless of, what region you're in, whether you're in the US or outside of the US, because you want to put more dollars in your pocket at the end of the day, not necessarily waste them on alerts or chargebacks or customer disputes. So keep this in mind. Please go ahead and watch the full VAMP episode where I talk about the rules and so forth. And if you have any questions on VAMP or fraud prevention, or if you want to set up, chargeback alerts to try to protect your store from chargebacks, feel free to let me know. Myself or somebody in my team at Direct Payment would be happy to help you. And if you need any more specifics or have specific questions on fraud and you'd like me to do another episode, I would love to hear from you. Please don't forget to like this episode and subscribe for more amazing content.